This is our annual Horses to Follow ahead of the national hunt season. It's a little bit delayed because I was ill last week, but I'm okay now. And I'm your host, George Elek, and I'm delighted to be joined by oddschecker's very own horse racing tipster, Andy Holding, and making his oddschecker betting show debut ahead of the national hunt season. We've got Dan Overall. Dan, for those who aren't aware of your work or haven't seen what you get up to before, I'll hand over to you to give a brief intro to everyone before we get into the selections.
Yeah, thanks, George. Yeah, pleasure to be here. So for people who don't know me, I'm national hunt only, so you will not see me for about 6 months of the year. I very much avoid the flat season like the plague, and it's just one of those things where I'm just a national hunt enthusiast. I was Racing TV's Tipstar winner a couple of years ago, so I've been around doing tipping here and there and popping up on podcasts, but it's the same oddschecker podcast debut, and I'm delighted to be here.
What's your general methodology? You know, we know that Andy is a times and figures man. We've had other people who maybe have got a good eye for spotting a winner. What would you say is your general method of picking winners?
I think it's a combination of all factors. I mean, I'm still relatively young to the game, so I've grown up listening to people like Andy and different people who all have their own different methodologies. So I think I've taken influence from multiple people. I think at the minute, something that may be getting me into a bit of trouble actually is I tend to be quite forgiving. Like, especially if I look back at last season, I look at trainers, say, that didn't have a great time of things for one reason or another. Say Neil King would be an example coming into this season. Obviously, he had Lookaway bolt up in the Grade 2 at Cheltenham. So if I can make an excuse for a horse, maybe why he's underperformed and why the market may not be factoring that in as much to try and get a bit of value there, that tends to be how I play it. But with that, there is obviously high risk and reward because sometimes they may just not be that good. But that tends to be the way I try and play things.
Interesting balance. I know Andy's someone who, after one poor run, he'll draw a big line through them, and that'll be it for them going forward. The way we're going to do this is I've asked the guys to come up with 5 horses each ahead of the season. Well, I mean, it's already begun in earnest, but looking forward to the national hunt season now. So we've got 5 horses each, and we'll go through them with each tipster alternate, and we'll kick off. Andy, you can have first run given you are oddschecker's main man, and we'll kick off with JPR One, who's your first selection, 5th in the Supreme back in 2022. I think the only runner out of the 10 on the show who's had a run already this season, winning last week, first start over fences for Joe Tizard. Andy, what is it about JPR One that has you firmly putting him in the notebook?
Yeah, I really liked his performance at Newton Abbot. There's only 3 runners, but it was a fair examination at the trip. ICO, who previously won over the course and distance, set out to make all again, and he went a not furious gallop, but he went a good even gallop all the way through. And JPR One was held up towards the back of the field. He was last of 3 going out to the final circuit. Gradually worked himself into it, and in the end, he ran out a really comprehensive winner when ICO fainted and fell out through the back of the telly because he just couldn't keep up the gallop. But JPR One, once he picked up the baton, ran hard all the way to line. Beat a horse called Monvial of Harry Durham's first run for that yard, who, to be fair, I could have almost put that in as well because I think he's a horse of some promise. But it was just the time thing. I mean, obviously you introduced me to Dan there as being a bit of a speed figure man. For regulars that follow the podcast, you'll know that I'm all over numbers, and so far, this horse has clocked the fastest novice chase. In fact, any chase that we've got so far this season. So I think this form is pretty good. But his jumping was so fantastic at that pace. And I do like that. If you've got a horse that can jump well at championship pace, that usually stands you in good stead. And what's interesting about that performance is the handicappers only raised him £4. I think it was an intermediate chase. I think it was a handicap. So it's meant that he's probably took a view that Monvial is the benchmark and ICO underperformed, who I think was about a 146 horse going into that. And I think we're going to be looking at JPR One as a 145 plus horse as the season progresses. He's miles better than his mark, and that's why I put him in this list. I normally like to have horses who haven't had a run yet, so if you like, they haven't shown their hand. But I do think this horse has got away with daylight robbery after that Newby run. Newton Abbot run, and I think he'll probably end up somewhere like Newby next time out at the old Hennessy meeting. It's a meeting that I think Joe Tizard back in the day liked to have plenty of nice horses running there, particularly his novice chase. And I think obviously I'll chip off the block. Joe will go down the same route. So yeah, JPR One. I think he's a promising novice chaser in the making, and I recommend listeners or viewers to keep him on side.
So you reckon another couple out? Well, with the mark of 134, a handicap or two to come, and then what do you think will be the long term aims or the long term prospects?
Well, I mean, you'd like to think he might be good enough to be in the conversation for an Arkle, although there's going to be classy horses. You got Marine National around. I mean, he if he takes the fences, I think he'll be a sort of 5 to 4 shot come next March in the Arkle if he does everything right over in Ireland. Particularly, as Constitution Hill now stays over hurdles, and it looks like Stayman's going down the same route. So, he's got a bit of a freebie over in Ireland. I don't think he's going to be in that class, but he might be something for something like the Grand Annual, maybe. But a lot depends on his mark and how he goes between now and then. So, but look, he's just a really nice horse, and I think his jumping will stand him in good stead throughout the season.
They don't tend to be afraid of a challenge, do they, to be fair? I mean, he ran him in the Supreme, I think, and he was finished down the field in the Betfair before that. So I think if they feel they've got a horse of that caliber, and I think they've always thought a lot of him, they may well chuck him in Grade 1 company, and maybe towards the end of the season, or maybe something for like the Holden Gold Cup, the start of next season, he might be something, a horse or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if Joe Tizard, if you are listening, stay tuned, because that's not the last one that Andy is putting up from your stable. So stay tuned. We've got, as I mentioned at the top, we've got loads of novice hurdlers, exciting novice hurdlers to come, and we'll start with the first one now. And Dan, we'll come to you first. There's a Willie Mullins bumper winner, a fair few of those knocking around, but there's one that in particular that's caught your eye in Mirazur West.
Yeah, it's hard to narrow them down. I think it was like 28 or so individual bumper winners for Willie Mullins last year. So it's not exactly an exhaustive list. But I just remember coming into this season, I remember he ran, I think, at the end of March or time. He avoided all the big festivals. And he just something about him really caught my eye. You go back to saying, like, what do I kind of look for? I'm not normally someone who goes completely on visuals, but Mirazur West, I just thought looked like he could be something special. And if you look at on paper what he's about, like, he just screams potential superstar to me. So he's 160,000 euros as a store. He was in the process of bolting up at a point-to-point when trained by Elmarie Holden, fell at the last that day. Derek O'Connor, who was on, personally recommended him to JP McManus that day, who was bought privately and sent to Willie Mullins. And he's a full brother to Fernie Hollow. So if races were run on paper, this horse would do a hell of a lot of winning. I say he's only running one bumper. That came at Naas at the end of March. It was well fancied that day. Maidall, I think, really impressed me how he travelled from the front that day. We know Fernie Hollow has been quite a quirky individual, extremely talented, but definitely has his quirks. And to a certain extent, Mirazur West showed that kind of similar tendency, but not to the same extreme. He was enthusiastic out on the front end without being overly keen. The second is a horse trained by Paul Nolan called He's My Hero, who ran very well at Punchestown afterwards. They think a lot of him. They think he could be a graded novice hurdler in the making. And the third was a 360-gram point-to-point winner in the colours of Envoy Allen & Co. So the form, while not necessarily firmly tested as of yet, looks like it could be fairly decent. And he just has a really likeable way of going. Obviously, full brother to Fernie Hollow. If you looked at his pedigree, you'd say, if you took Fernie Hollow out of it, more 2.5 miler by Westerner. Like, there's plenty of stamina there, but showed plenty of pace, I thought, in that bumper. They'll start him over 2 miles, and I know he's been a bit of a buzz horse in the stable to stores early part of the season, especially for races like the Supreme. We'll see if he's that quality, because Willie's going to have a lot of French recruits lurking as well. But one I'm really excited to see out, and I hope he can make up into a Grade 1 novice hurdler this season.
Dan, obviously people watching this show, it is October, but I know that lots of the viewers will be looking ahead to Cheltenham and looking at Cheltenham anti-post markets already. You mentioned there, there's been some buzz around the Supreme. 12-1 best price for the Supreme as it stands now, 20-1 for the Ballymore. Given that you said you think the future might lie at 2.5, would you be more inclined to be backing the bigger price of the two?
I think at the minute, just because of his enthusiasm, I don't think they'll be in a rush to up him in trip. Obviously, a lot will depend on how he shapes initially. Hurdles may settle him down a tad, but I think he's got enough pace to start over 2 miles. And I'd imagine that'll be the route they go down. I think he'll be pretty much sticking to those 2 mile graded races. Again, there's so many variables there. Obviously, JP himself has so many different horses he could run in various races. Willie will do the same. So while I think if he learns to settle in time, his pedigree will suggest 2.5 miles won't be a problem. I'd say the market is agreeing with me that I think he's more likely to stick to 2 miles for the time being.
Andy, what do your speed figures say about? Dan's obviously been impressed visually. What did the numbers say?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't necessarily an eye-popping performance on the clock. Obviously, I watched the video back and took the liberty to watch all Dan's entries. So I have a view on them to a degree. He clocked a 40 speed figure, which wouldn't mean anything to Dan, but the benchmark for a really good bumper is sort of anything over 60 or 65. The championship horses will run somewhere around the 65 to 70 mark. The fastest bumper horse we had last year was 70. I think the championship bumper at the festival was something in around the 68, 69 mark, and the one at Aintree was 64. So those are the kind of strongly run bumpers that, that the form's there for all to see. I'm not, using that as a stick to beat Mirazur. He's obviously got a pile of talent, and we won't really know how good he is until he runs in a strongly race. It's not his fault they went slow. Sometimes you can actually upgrade horses the other way around if they still win despite racing keenly and using up energy, and yet they still manage to stay on as well as he did. So it depends on which way you look at it. But like I say, I couldn't endorse him off a time figure perspective, but visually and what he's going to do in future when he does go in the better races, then only time will tell.
Only time will tell, indeed. Mirazur West, the first selection there for Dan. Andy, your second selection now. Another bumper winner, and let's stick with the Tizzard team. It's Diamond Rye.
Yeah, out of my 5, I think if I had to categorise them 1 to 5 and give a 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2, 1, this would be the 5. This is definitely the nicest horse on my list. He's a gorgeous son of Diamond Boy, scopy, physically imposing, got a lovely way of going, long big stride on him, and he was really tested first time out in a strongly run bumper, so much so that was the fastest time that we got all season, including the championship bumper at Cheltenham and at Aintree. It's quite an extraordinarily run race, and Diamond Boy went through it like he was a proper horse. He never came off the bridle. He hit the line strong. He was actually eased down in the closing stage as well, just to emphasise his superiority. I don't think he beat a lot. I don't think you can look at the others in behind and say, okay, we'll pick holes in him with the second, third, fourth, or whatever. I just think he won, by a space, and the other horses were just chasing shadows. But I think he's about as exciting horse as the Tizzards have got this season. Obviously, I've chucked in JPR One for a chaser because they always do well in that department. Not necessarily renowned for their hurdling exploits. They're more, old-fashioned in many respects, aren't they? With the horses that your Q cards of this world. But Q card was no slouch when he, flew through his novice season and obviously won the Tolworth, etc. And I expect this horse to be, in that kind of bracket. Again, I don't know where. I'm not privy to the information where he starts. I like it, the fact that horses like that they're not starting just yet. They don't go in the showcase meeting. They're seen as proper horses for the rest of the season, so they'll probably start to win mid-November, which is traditional, and then work their way through. So I expect him to have 1 stroke, maybe 2 runs before he goes into graded company. Don't forget the Tolworth this year he switched to Aintree. They've decided to move that grade 1 now instead of running at Sandown. It goes to Aintree, so it might be a different dynamic there than usual. A sharper track, of course. But I do expect him to be in grade 1 company sooner rather than later. So Diamond Ree, my banker out of the 5 to do really well this season.
And he has an entry on Friday at Wetherby in a novice hurdle over 2 miles. So
and
a few interesting ones in that.
On Saturday as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm actually at Wetherby Friday, Saturday. I didn't know that, so that's a real treat.
There you go.
But yeah, I'd imagine he'd be. I haven't seen the entry, so you wouldn't want to get the prices, but I'd imagine he'd be a very, very short price favourite unless there's something sexy from a Nichols Yard or even an Irish Raider or a Dan Skelton horse.
Andy, I agree, but that's because this pod, you've taken your own price on Friday. You could have been there, you've halved it in price just by flagging it up here. Disaster.
I mean, he might not be the kind of horse I'd be backing at a thin price. If he's like 4 to 5, 4 to 6 up, sort of take it or leave it at that price. But he's probably one worth seeing what price anti-post is after he wins first time out. If he creates the impression, I think he will.
Well, he's 50 to 1 for both the Supreme and the Ballymore now. Only a couple of firms pricing him up. I think Hills and Unibet are the two. So you may have to shop around, but I'm sure if he impresses over hurdles, and there's, as I said, entry on Friday at Wetherby and an entry at Ascot on Saturday as well. So if he impresses there, I'm sure more firms will price them up and come out accordingly with prices for those two. As Andy says, maybe worth waiting until you see that. But we're going back over to Ireland now, to another who's priced up for both the Supreme and the Ballymore. This time, a Gordon Elliott bumper winner for Dan and Firefox.
Yeah, he had a bit of a strange campaign last year. I remember when he made his rules debut, it was actually over hurdles. He just looked completely clueless, this horse. Like, I thought he was a massive eye catcher when he finished fourth that day. And I was thinking maybe down the road, if they kind of got his act together, he could be one for an end of season handicap. But I think Gordon's did what he has done a few times in recent years, actually, just switched him to bumpers after that run. I think just with the impression that he needed more education. And I say it's been a tactic that's actually paid off for him in the past. He's the likes of No More Heroes started off that way. He finished third in the Bartlett afterwards. Tombstone finished fourth in the Supreme, the Storyteller. So plenty of his really smart horses have running a hurdle race and reverted to bumpers after not necessarily showing what was expected. So I wouldn't use that as a stick to beat him with. So when he went back into bumpers, he was narrowly beat on his first start, and that was to Lachlan, who would finish ninth in the champion bumper. So that was fair form. Still looking a bit unsure and a bit like he was learning on the job. Went on to win a weaker event next time out, actually a race that Gordon previously won with Ginto, so a race that he knows well. And then he went to Punchestown, where he narrowly prevailed in a real strong staying effort to beat Il Antique of Willie Mullins and Tony Bloom. I think a horse they think a lot of. And again, it could be one for Grade 1 novice hurdles for that team as well. I think the jockey actually did pick up a whip band for it, but it was a really strong staying performance. Those two pulled well clear. I thought they looked like two real nice horses to go forward with. Now, he's a half brother to the Boss's Oscar, who I think now maybe people think, oh, that's not exactly the best sign. He's a bit enigmatic these days. But a couple of years ago, this is a horse who was second in the Pretemps final of 151. Like, he was pretty useful in his prime, while he's maybe not at that anymore. But there's decent pedigree behind him, and I think he's a real staying type to look forward to. I don't think the Supreme or the Ballymore will be where he ends up. If he ends up at Cheltenham, I think it's more likely to be the Albert Bartlett. I can definitely see him as the type of horse to end up maybe running in the Lawlers and Ace, maybe the Nathaniel Lacey, although they tend to skip that race and maybe go straight to Cheltenham. But he actually is entered in Down Royal at the weekend, where obviously Gordon tends to start off plenty of his useful horses. He's in the 2 mile 6 novice hurdle that Gordon's won 7 of the last 8 years, likes of American Mike, Hollow Games, Fury Road, Farouk Delaine, all started in that race. He's one of a couple of entries for Gordon Elliott. I think Down Memory Lane is the other one. But I think of those two, Firefox is the more staying type. And again, I'd be disappointed if he can't be one of Gordon's top novice hurdlers. It doesn't all go to plan early days. It wouldn't surprise me to see if they campaign him maybe with something like the Martin Pipe in mind. But I think if he wins on his novice hurdling debut and then goes, say, like the Nace Grade 2 novice hurdle as well over 2.5, I can see him campaigning him like a proper Grade 1 staying horse, like they did with Ginto. And he may well end up in the Albert Bartlett come March.
May end up in the Albert Bartlett. We've got prices for the Supreme and the Ballymore. I didn't even look at the Bartlett, so I'm going to have to try and get it as we speak.
I think he's 25 to 1, best price, I believe.
There we go. So shortest of the three. Supreme 33 to 1, Ballymore 28 to 1, the Bartlett 25 to 1, according to Dan. We'll take your word for it. But of course, listeners and viewers, just go to the oddschecker grids and you can find the Albert Bartlett prices there for the best price. This is the issue, Dan, when you're on with Andy, is I now have to pass over to Andy and he's going to tell you what the speed figure was. So, Andy, how does Firefox stack up on the numbers?
Yeah, really good. This one's definitely got a thumbs up. Courtesy of his Navan victory, actually. I mean, he's that last one when he won at Punchestown or Fairy House? I can't remember now. Was it
Punchestown? Yeah.
It was Punchestown. He only beat Al Antarctique. That was a little bit more of a slowly run race. Obviously, 4 runners. Paddy Mullins dictated from the front, so he didn't go mad gallop. So, like I say, it wasn't his fault that it wasn't a massive time. But he's run the time before when he won by 10 wickets. That was a good number, 64. So you're talking, good bump. I've said anything over 60 for a bumper on our numbers is good. So 64 is not a million miles off championship level. Down Royal Friday looks like whichever race he runs in, that'll be a good stepping stone for something maybe at Fairy House, maybe the Royal Bond or something like that. Looks a 2.5 mile horse to me.
Seal of approval there from Andy. And Andy, talking of smart bumper form, it doesn't get much smarter than winning the Aintree bumper in April with Florida Dreams won it for Nicky Richards and is your third selection of 5.
Yeah, it was one of those days back in April that you sort of like almost pinch yourself if this is really happening. Managed to jump on, I think one of Gordon Elliott's who won the Grade 1. I forget its name now. I think
Irish Point?
Irish Point, yeah. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, back to Irish Point, back the national winner. And then I was flagging up Florida Dreams all the way through the week on podcasts and sort of a few racing preview nights I was doing. No real pressure on it really because he was a 25-1 shot, so it didn't really make any difference if I was wrong or not. But he was really impressive when he won at Musselburgh. Clocked an extraordinary number for a race up Musselburgh. I thought, oh, this must be a good horse. And his back end sectionals were really good as well. It was just like, oh, what on earth is this? Beat a good field. They were well touted at the Scottish track, and I think he carried a little bit of confidence going into that Aintree race by connections, having read the sort of post-race comments, and he was sort of like totally dismissed. But he won despite meeting a huge amount of trouble in running as well down the straight. He had to weave and slalom his way through, horses dropping back in his lap. So it wasn't a sort of straightforward victory, but I love the way he got to the line, and he was by far and away the best horse in the race, won it on merit. I think he's due to start his season off next week, I think, or maybe the week. I think there's a race nominated.
Yeah,
that's right. November the 4th, is it?
Yeah, Saturday,
yeah. Which looks a good starting point. I just think he wants nicest ground to start off with, and if he went soft or heavy, I don't think they'd run him. Even though he's a big horse, I think good to soft is ideal for him because he's not slow. And I think the ultimate target, or the early season target, is that Tolworth, which is now run at Aintree, which obviously he's already proven himself around Aintree, rather than Sandown. I don't think Sandown would suit him. Heavy ground, slogging his way around there, that wouldn't be no good for him. But something like good to soft in place at Aintree over the Christmas period would be absolutely ideal, or just before the Christmas period. So yeah, Florida Dreams, he has to go on the list. He's a horse sort of close to my heart. I followed him, and I'm going to stay loyal to him. And it's not as if Nicky Richards either doesn't know where the M6 is either. If he wanted to go to Cheltenham with him next season, because I think that's where he'll end up.
I was going to say, given that you think the Tolworth at Aintree will be the plan, I mean, the market has Florida Dreams 20-1 for the Ballymore and 33-1 for the Supreme. Do you think he's a 2-miler, or do you think he might step up and chip?
Well, I mean, most horses that win or run well in the championship bumper at Cheltenham end up being 2.5 milers predominantly. I think they've got a poor record in the Supreme. I was reading last year on the stats, so I think that lends itself to the staying types winning. So why would the Aintree bumper be any different, even though it's a sharper track and perhaps pacier horses do win it? Again, I think the sort of like tail of the tape says that maybe the stayers do win that as well. You have to stay really well to win those races, I think. So you'd like to think that they'll start off at 2 and then see how they go, and then maybe work their way up through the ranks. But if they are thinking of a Tolworth hurdle around Aintree over 2 miles, then they like I say, they certainly don't think he's void of speed, and the numbers we've got him doing, then that certainly seems to be the case.
Dan, you obviously take a keen eye on these on bumper form. What have you made of Florida Dreams thus far?
Yeah, I do like that Aintree bumper this year. So the third horse, Hastings, I thought would be useful recruit for John Joe O'Neill as well. I think the likes of Masaccio, I think, is due to run tomorrow as well. He was staying on 7th. So I thought that race it can often be a bit hit or miss. I thought this year was actually quite a good renewal, maybe slightly overlooked because, I say, Florida Dreams wasn't necessarily top of the market, wasn't the most fancied runner in the race, and so people may think it wasn't that good form. But I say he was very impressive that day, and I think there's a few in behind that were definitely worth keeping an eye on this season.
Good stuff. Well, let's look at your third selection. Hopefully another one worth keeping an eye on. Cuthbert Dibble, your next up selection for Nigel Twiston Davis. Last team winning novice hurdle over 2.5 at Foss Lass. So what about Cuthbert Dibble's performances thus far? Have you put him firmly in the notebook? Yeah,
so we've had a couple of, I think, potential Grade 1 horses. I wouldn't have Cuthbert Dibble in that ballpark, but he's a horse I really like, and I've kind of gone with a few handicappers to fill out the list, and he's one I think he's definitely worth keeping on side. He was really busy last season, actually. He ran in a couple of bumpers where I think he shaped reasonably well, but he just clearly wasn't a bumper horse. That was never going to be where he thrived. Even though his couple of starts over hurdles to start with over 2 miles, He was quite novice-y, still very much looked like a work in progress, but obviously just crying out for a step up in trip as well. As soon as he got that, he won but impressively at Leicester by 19 lengths on really testing ground. Leicester in heavy ground could often turn into a real test of stamina, and that's what it was that day. And people were so impressed by that performance. He went off 4-1 for the EBF final, a race that year after year works out extremely well. Didn't quite work out for him on the day. He was held up right on the inside. He was still about 11th when they turned for home, but he did get a bit of daylight eventually and stayed on really well into 5th. That race, as I say, normally works out extremely well. He got another boost the other day where Crambo won at Aintree extremely impressively. Obviously, he was the EBF final winner. I think of the 13 to have run since that race, 9 have won. Cuthbert Dibble being another one of those, as you say, went on to make all under novice company at the back end of last season. And I think that's what another appealing factor about him. He does seem very uncomplicated. He can make his own running. He can sit in behind. It all kind of comes alike to him. By Cave Tara, his dam's related to a few chase winners, including Banjak's Girl, who was a very useful mare for Nigel Twiston-Davies. One of her progeny also includes Lamilos. So plenty of chasers in the pedigree, and I think that's where we're going to see the best of him. I think he's a real 3-mile chaser in the making. Obviously, he's under the right tutelage in Nigel Twiston-Davies to get the most out of him as well. And we've seen with the likes this season already of Broadway Boy, Idauka Bahui, Master Chewy, all made extremely impressive starts to their chasing careers. I think Cuthbert Dibble will be another one in those moulds. Currently rated 125. I think he'll improve a fair bit beyond that once he sees a fence and 3 miles. I say this could be one of those horses we're seeing in those top 3-mile handicap chases for the next couple of seasons.
Andy, you said you had time to go and have a look through all of Dan's selections. What did you make of Cuthbert Dibble?
Yeah, I've been a big advocate of Cuthbert Dibble in my column quite a few times last season. I think I put him up in the EBF final at Sandown. He was out of the money that day, but as Dan said, the form's been sensational since. With I backed a horse called Cribbilly out the race. He won next time out. Crambo won the other day. Inniston, he's a nice horse. Gary Moore's finished second. Hugo's new horse. It looked a really strong renewal. So, to finish 5th in that was certainly no shame. And then, he won well last time out. His numbers are good as well. Not in the top echelon, but certainly enough to suggest that he's going to be winning race off 125. So yeah, that's another good. A good choice by Dan there. Nice little handicapper to go to war with. From a yard who that can do no wrong at the moment. That Twiston-Davies stable, they must be running at the best strike rate so far.
Yeah, absolutely flying at the moment. Hopefully we'll continue to do so with Cuthbert Dibble at the forefront of that over the course of the season. Andy, Monbeg Park for you now. Interesting profile, having won last time out over 2 miles of Punchestown, having previously been running over 2.5 and even over 3 miles, but the drop back and trip, even at this early stage, seemed to have done the trick.
Yeah, sometimes you get like these pointers that actually end up being good 2-milers. Constitution Hill. I'm not saying this horse is as good as that, but they show just far too much speed in their races, and it took a while for Connections to kind of like work out that maybe that is his best trip. I'm not saying for 1 minute he's not going to be a 2.5, or he won't get 2.5 miles, because he stayed it well enough on several occasions last year. In fact, they tried him over 3 and he didn't run too badly. His only bad run was in the Lawlers and Ace when it was really bottomless ground, and he's not quite a Grade 1 horse yet. But I think he's just been marking time over hurdle. If you look at him, he's an absolute giant by how to walk in the park. He got disqualified when he won at Fairyhouse. A little bit of mild interference that day in a handicap when he beat Risk Bell. I thought he was a bit unfortunate to lose it. It's one of the, almost like, I think it was a VAR referral. It might have been overturned. And he got his due compensation next time out at Punchestown. But his last 2 time figures were both very good, particularly in that handicap. And I do like horses that can run well at a novice company in those big old open older horse handicaps and hold their own, because they are more strongly run than normal novice hurdles. So he is proving in a big field where they go a good gallop. And I think he'll go straight over fences this season because he's from a point-to-point background. He'll start off in a beginner's chase somewhere, no doubt. Whether he'll win it, I don't know. Depends on if there's a Willie Mullins horse in there. But he should really pay his way throughout the course of the season. Like I say, I don't really know where he'll end up with regards to festivals. Don't see him as a Cheltenham Festival horse per se, but he does go really well right-handed. All of his form seems to be at the Punchestown Fairyhouses as well, which is a handy thing because there is other festivals other than Cheltenham. later on in the spring, and I think that's where he'll be. So Monbeg Park, in nice little horse, just short of grade one level, maybe even handicaps throughout the season.
One just to keep backing Monbeg Park there, Andy's 4th selection. Over back to you, Dan. Foxy Girl for Henry de Bromhead, last seen in the Mare's Novice. What has impressed you about Foxy Girl?
Yeah, she's a tricky one. As you say, she went into that Mare's Novice, but she never really had a straightforward campaign last season. But what I saw of her, I'd be surprised off her mark 123. There aren't plenty of races to be won. I think she could make up into a mare that's of graded level. So off 123, I'd be very hopeful there's more to come. She was second on her Irish debut on her first start of 600 days after coming over from France. That day she ran into Liberty Dance, who'd had a run under her belt and was just clearly more experienced on the day. She went on to win a listed race next time out. The third, who was several lengths behind the two, is now rated 123. So that form worked out reasonably well. And she made no mistake next time out when winning on St Stephen's Day at Limerick. Race with plenty of enthusiasm. That's very much her forte and what she's been doing, sometimes too much. But on this day, she made all, was always in control of the race. And she beat a Willie Mullins horse called In Excess, who bolted up next time out, held entries in the likes of the Supreme, didn't go because I think he had a few hold-ups. But a horse they seemed to think was of reasonable ability. So that paints her in a good light. And then she looks set to go for the Mare's Handicap at the Dublin Racing Festival, a race that is notoriously very strong, a race that has often produced like Cheltenham Festival winners have kicked on from there. And she was the anti-post favourite for it. I think she was as short as 7-2 when the markets opened, but she picked up an injury, which meant she didn't go. So after only having a couple of starts, including only winning one, coming on a maiden hurdle pre-New Year, they went straight to Cheltenham, as you say, for that Mare's Novice hurdle. And despite Henry, I think, had 5 runners in that race, Henry de Bromhead, and obviously it was a race that meant a lot to him on this occasion as well. I found it really interesting that Foxy Girl was the choice of Rachel Blackmore, and she went off the shortest price of Henry's 5 runners, despite the lack of experience and clearly with the absence to contend with as well. I think her early keenness, like I mentioned, just cost her that day. I think Rachel was trying to hold her up to try and get her to relax a bit more, but she just took too much of a hold on the outside, took herself far too forward compared to what Rachel wanted, and probably just used up too much energy too soon. I still think she ran a race full of promise, only beaten 12 lengths in the end despite doing a lot wrong. I say she's still a mare with so much upside, I think, only rated 123. It wouldn't surprise me if they're looking at that Dublin Racing Festival Mare's Handicap again as a potential target for her. I think she's got another race in her before that, and if she does kick on like I hope she would, she may end up being graded class by the end of the season. But I'd be hopeful of 123. They've got a couple of races that could be won with her this season.
And any view?
Yeah, big view. I don't know if you wouldn't remember, but we obviously covered the Dublin Racing Festival, didn't we, on a podcast? I think me and Johnny Ward, and we did both days. And I distinctly remember saying that Foxy Girl is one to keep an eye on if they run it in that novices handicap on the Sunday. Or the mare's handicap, sorry, on the Sunday, and I think she was 7-1 7-1.
She was pretty sure.
She was 7-1. I remember she was 7-1 on the Monday and Tuesday when they opened prices, but then she contracted into 7-2, and then she ended up not running, which was a real body blow for those that had backed her. But her time figure the time before at Limerick was very good. So she probably would have made a mockery of a handicap mark, and she's actually been dropped to 1-2-3 after being 1-2-7 going into Cheltenham, which seemed a bit odd considering she ran so well in a Grade 1. I think Dan's onto something with that one.
There we go, Dan. You're getting it's not normally like this. Normally, Andy's sitting there saying terrible, awful number, the rest of it. You're getting too many seals of approval. 3 yeses.
Well, after Mirazur West, I was getting a bit. I was like, oh no, what have I got myself into? And then we've gone 3 in a row. So yeah, I'll take that. I've already got. Whatever happens with the last one, that's more yeses than no's.
That's a win. You've won.
I call that a success. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, move on. We don't even have to do the last one. We're 4 through 4 with 5 apiece, so one more each. And Andy, finally for you, you're a showman yourself, and your 5th and final selection is Theatre Man, who's got a couple of entries into handicap chases this weekend. A Kempton winner over 2 miles 5 in a novice hurdle. Prior to that, a horse you must think is well suited for chasing.
I hope so. Yeah. Again, he's with a trainer that predominantly is thought of as a a sort of horse. He brings horses on through the ranks and then goes chasing with them. And he certainly got that look about him. If you watch any of his videos and his replays, I love the way he won at Kempton. He beat 2 horses that are very highly regarded. One from Nicky Henderson's stable. The third horse was one of Dan Skelton's, who I think had finished 3rd in a Grade 2 at Haydock. Behind
the Prestige. Yeah.
They're beyond the. There's a Paul Nicholls horse that won it. Making your mind up or something
Making
like
your
that.
mind up.
Is it making your mind? It is making your mind up. Yeah. He got beat subsequently at Perth by that Giovinco, who could have easily gone on the list, by the way, but he fell the other day, so I thought I'd leave him off. So that, he wasn't beating any mugs at Kempton, and he beat them very, very readily. Again, a good time figure. Up there with some of the not nicer novices that we had below championship level. Just like I say, just looked like a thorough stay, a really likeable type, nice attitude, jumps well, very consistent type as well. I think he'll do well, particularly in those early season novices handicaps. I think they're really strong pieces of form. I think if I had to give one piece of advice to the listeners and the viewers is to do follow some of those hotter ones, particularly with the ones with the good time figures, because I think they're very strong. They're very there's a lot of strength in depth in those kind of races. They're much better than beginners chases and novice chases. So I think Theatre Man off of Mark, I think in the 120s at the moment. If he gets what he gets over hurdles, that'll be a good starting point for him over fences.
Dan, any view on Andy's final selection? This is your chance to stick the knife into him.
No, I wish I could, but no, I do agree with that one. It's much easier to go when I didn't come in with any prep on his ones. I could maybe been able to dig out some dirt, but I'm doing this on the fly. But no, I think Richard Bandy has proven in recent seasons as well with those types, like St. Palais being the most notable example. I guess a couple of seasons ago, really kicked on over fences and became a real top class handicap chaser. I don't think he necessarily had the best season last year, Richard Bandy, compared to last year. So the fact that he was able to have actually a decent performance there and obviously win at Kempton so impressively may mark him up even more. So I think I agree with Andy, especially on those novice handicap chases. You get plenty that are really, really good form, especially early in the season. So even if he necessarily doesn't win straight away in one of those races, it wouldn't surprise me if by the end of the season he hasn't racked up a couple of decent wins.
Great stuff. Close off now, Dan, with your final selection. Nicky Henderson, 2 mile novice hurdler, Immortal. Yet to get off the mark. Form figures of 2-2, so not far away, and an opening mark of 110.
Yeah, very much an unknown quantity still, but I'd be very disappointed if he wasn't a lot better than 110. Like even the build up to last season, there were a few whispers about this horse, thinking he could be potentially quite smart. And I thought it was notable that he made his debut at Sandown in a race that Nicky Henderson really does like to target. It's the Constitution Hill, won it a couple of years before that, Vaneto, 007 in recent years alone. So it tends to be a decent one he sends to that race. This year he just ran into Authorized Speed, who had experience, he had fitness, obviously ran extremely well in the Champion Bumper before that. Just a far more complete horse at that stage of his career. I think still ran pretty well in there. Pulled clear of the third is a horse called Godot, who's now rated 111. He was actually 13 lengths behind Immortal. So if you take that on pure form, then Immortal's mark 110 looks very lenient. Wouldn't maybe take it literally on Sandown soft ground, but I think it shows you that potentially the caliber that he is and how he can be better than mark 110. And then unfortunately he ran into another smart Gary Moore horse. I think the horse I've got a lot of hope for in Gavega on his next start. Don't think he would have beat Gavega that day, but did make a notable error at the second lash, which really did hinder his winning chance. Wasn't the difference between winning and losing, but again, pulled well clear of the third. I was surprised they gave him an opening mark 110. Obviously, he only ran twice, placed twice, so they're allowed to do that. But I think that looks extremely lenient for all that he does lack experience. And I was pretty adamant, given obviously Nicky's general MO of experience and nursing these horses along, that he'd probably go for a maiden or a novice hurdle first. But I saw today that he's got an entry at Ascot on Saturday in the conditional jockeys handicap hurdle. Now, if he does run in that off 110, I'd be very, very strong on him. And obviously, I think they've started the year quite quick as well in comparison to recent seasons. So he'd be one I'd be desperate to have on the side for a race like that. And I spoke to Nicky Henderson a couple of months ago about this horse, and he gave me a nice little quote about him, which I'll read for you. So he's a 5-year-old we all like a lot. a lovely, big, beautiful moving grey who was big and a bit weak last season. Went straight over hurdles and he started an outstanding run at Sandown, jumping beautifully, was just outwitted by a good young horse in authorised speed. Went back to Sandown again, and although finishing second, ran a race full of promise. He's had a great summer, and the fact that he's still a novice can only be to his benefit. And hopefully, with a full campaign, he can go a long, long way over hurdles, and he'll be a very exciting chaser when he goes over fences in a year or so time. So I know people take trainer comments with maybe a bit more skepticism these days, but I think they surely are of the opinion this is not a 110 horse. So I think one to keep on side if he does appear in a handicap early in the season.
Really interesting stuff. Andy, how do you rate those first 2 runs?
Yeah, good. See, funny enough, his first one was better on our numbers than the second. He got a 62 rating first time up, and then we awarded him just a 54 the next time. So once he regressed, again, it was just the nature of the how the race was run second time in comparison to the first time. Sometimes, they can only run how the number, how the race develops. So I wouldn't take that as too much of a detriment about him going forward. But a 62 is really good, particularly first time out. So again, say anything over a 60 novice hurdles bumpers, that's always pretty good. So yeah, not as strong as the other 3 that I think Dan's picked prior, but given that the comments that Nicky says and the likely of more to come, an interesting one all the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan bringing Nicky Henderson exclusive quotes to the table and on a debut. Strong showing from Dan. Excellent stuff, guys. I'll quickly run through your selection so everyone can get their pens and paper out and jot them all down. For Dan, the 5, Mirazur West for Willie Mullins, Firefox for Gordon Elliott, Nigel Twiston-Davis's Cuthbert Dibble, Henry de Bromhead's Foxy Girl, and Nicky Henderson's Immortal. And for Andy, JPR One and Diamond Rye both for Joe Tizard, Florida Dreams for Nicky Richards, Monbeg Park for Sean Doyle, and Richard Bandy's Theatre Man. Thank you both for sharing those thoughts and the insight with us today. Make sure that you subscribe to the oddschecker YouTube channel where you can find the oddschecker betting show most weeks through the national hunt season. Andy will be back. Dan will be back as well as we preview races as we go through. We're going to be back in a week or so's time as well with Johnny Ward as we look specifically at Irish horses to follow too. So do stay tuned for that in particular, where Andy and Johnny will be on looking at those. And in the meantime, make sure you also watch Racing Weekly, which you can find on the Oddschecker YouTube channel as well. And check out the Oddschecker app where you can find the best prices, bookie offers, free bets, and plenty more, including Andy's tips straight to the app every morning of racing. Thanks to Dan. Thanks to Andy. We'll see you soon. Hopefully a few winners over the course of the season. Enjoy it and enjoy the racing this week.